Who knows what perils await at this ancient outpost in the wastes? Hi there, I'm Cal Spriggs. Today I'm going to show you how I made a Wastelands outpost for use in Necromunda and Warhammer 40k. Now this was a very large build, it's a large project, so it's actually going to take 3 videos to show you how I did it. Now I've always liked gaming on terrain that had some sort of epic scale and scope to it, as well as something that tells a history of a place. So when I set out to build this, I initially sketched out a few different designs, several of which included bunkers or turrets or that sort of thing. So when I actually went to build it, I tried to work in those clear signs of ancient inhabitation, as well as working in clear indicators that there are more recent scavengers or raiders that have taken up residence in this once ancient ruin. Blue XPS foam that I got at a hardware store for this project, and I used a foam cutter, wire foam cutter, and cut those striations that you see in it, as well as the ramp. And I like using the foam cutter over using a hobby knife or a crafting knife, because I was able to get much smoother cuts, which is what I was looking for in this. And overall, it's a lot less hassle and cleanup. The note with this is you got to do it outside or someplace with adequate ventilation, so you're not going to get a lot of fumes. And when I cut it, I labeled each of the pieces, as you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so that I could put it all back together the way it was supposed to be, so I knew which end was up, and so it all fit properly. You can see I show it off here for the camera, kind of what I'm envisioning for the rock outcropping itself, along with some of the initial signs of human habitation, such as the doors that are cut into the rock. Now, as far as putting it on the base, I will go ahead and say here that I made a mistake initially. This is the first base I cut out for it, and you'll see why I had to do a second one later. I applied this construction adhesive to it. It did a fairly good job on the foam-to-foam contact, but against this MDF board, I did not smooth it out. I left it kind of gloopy and thought that just the pressure and weight of applying it and putting the heavy books I put on it later would work. Now with the foam, that worked fine. I got a great bond. They went together really well, but on the MDF board, for whatever reason, it just did not spread out properly. So you can see I'm applying this construction adhesive, and as I've said in my other videos, be sure you have the right type. Reading on the label, this one said it's foam safe, XPS foam safe, so I was able to use this one successfully, didn't have any issues. Everything went together pretty smoothly. I really like the construction adhesive because it holds it really solidly, and this is a really big piece. It's kind of hard to tell scale from this angle, but it's very large for gaming. It's meant to be a centerpiece for my table, so I really wanted the bonds on this thing to be solid. I really wanted the base to be solid. That's why I used MDF board. I didn't want this thing tilting or tipping or falling over and breaking. I wanted it to be a solid piece. And I really got that with the construction adhesive. The foam as well is nice and solid. When you got the final product, it holds up very well to gaming, so I really like how it came out. But it was really important to me developing a final product for this that was solid. Equally important here was making sure I had everything lined up properly. I cut it all outside, brought it inside. I believe it was a few hours between when I assembled it and when I cut it, so I wanted to make sure that everything lined up properly, that I didn't forget where things were supposed to go, that sort of thing. And so you can see me several times checking, making sure everything lines up correctly, and overall just trying to make sure it works as well as I could. At the end of this, you see me put these heavy books on there, and that's great for pushing the construction adhesive out between the pieces of foam, but again, with the MDF, it just didn't cut it, as you'll see later in the video. From this angle, you can see a good view of the ramp, which I really wanted to act as sort of a loading dock or something that I can drive vehicles up onto. Now in this section here, I'm adding plaster. It's wall repair plaster that I got again from hardware store, and I'm using a little sculpting tool here to seal all those gaps between the different pieces of foam. It's not very much, but when you go to paint it, they stand out pretty starkly, and you can realize this is multiple pieces that have been glued together. So I went along, took my time. It's not exactly a fun and exciting process as you're doing it, but a little bit of music or some books in the back, audiobooks in the background helped tremendously as far as passing the time. Watching movies or that sort of thing as well also help. And really, this is just a matter of making sure all those little gaps are closed so that when you go to paint it or seal it, you end up with a product that looks like a uniform chunk of rock. While doing this, I later switched to just using my finger, but here I was using the applicator trying to get into those very narrow corners that edge there with a 90-degree angle. It was very hard to get my finger into. So I started out using this tool to try and get all the little tiny gaps closed up, any imperfections in the foam as well, spots where, in shipping or whatever it had been damaged. I went in there and sealed those up. While I was doing this, I was also thinking about texturing it, how I was going to do that. As you probably saw in one of my other videos, I used sand and a mix of PVA to provide texture to those other rock formations I made, and I planned on doing the same thing here. I also was using some of this plaster because when it dries, you can get a nice texture from it that's sort of gritty, sort of a finer grit. So that's what I was thinking about here. I ended up using some of the extra plaster from this to do that. You can see it's taken a while as I work there trying to fill in all the gaps, thinking about different colors I want to do, different things I want to do with it. So as we go into this next part, this is a great time to remind you to like and subscribe, as you're about to see my big error for today's video. So please give it a like and subscribe as we go into the next piece, because up here is where I realized that I made a boo-boo. You can see that about 1/4 inch gap there as I'm plastering in that second or third layer. I'll angle it down a bit more, but you can see there by my wrist, it's a pretty big gap, and I started noticing problems there as well. Was thinking, wow, I probably can't use plaster to close that. I better see how serious this is. What you can't see well from the video is it was kind of wobbly as well, and I was realizing that maybe the construction adhesive hadn't worked as well as I'd hoped. I didn't know the extent of the problem. I just knew it was kind of bad. So I was hoping, maybe if I kept on going, kept on working, I would get that resolved and it wouldn't be as bad as I was expecting. So here I am continuing to close it up, thinking about how to fix that base and what I needed to do. And then I just realized it all had to go. So I peeled that base off. It came off way too easy. Told me that it had not properly given a bond, and I just got out a scraper and removed all the adhesive from the bottom of the foam. The fact that it came off so easily also told me I hadn't gotten a good bond here. So I did what I did with my other rock formations. I got this all cleaned up, and then I went and threw out that old base. And here's the rock formation, by the way, all closed up. It looked pretty good. You can see the plaster I slapped on it for some texture too. And then here's the new base. I went and cut a whole new base with jigsaw, got out the construction adhesive, drew my pretty designs with it, and then I got out the trusty butter knife I had, which I then used to smooth it out and get as much surface area as possible on it. You have to have, especially with how heavy the MDF is relative to the foam, you have to have as much surface area as you possibly can. I'd also roughed up the surface of the MDF with some sandpaper, some fine grit sandpaper, to just give it that much more texture and surface area to grab onto. Overall, this worked way better once I got this smoothed up, set, and cured. It's very solid. I haven't had any problems since. So I definitely recommend doing this rather than doing what I did. Also, with these side by side, you can really see the scale of this thing. It takes up most of my work area. It's just colossal. It was actually pretty difficult to get a good angle most of the time with the camera. So at this point, you can see me cutting out a section for this big cardboard tube that I want to slide in there. Now, I got this tube at one of my previous jobs where I was doing drafting, engineering and drafting, architectural drafting. And this is actually a tube off a plotter. Typically, those are recycled at a lot of places, but the place I worked at, they didn't. They just threw them out. And I printed and plotted so much stuff there that I have a whole bunch of these lying around that I just took home from work because I didn't want them. They also had some really cool end pieces that they came in, which I have a few of those as well. But I don't plan on putting it that big, as you can see, but I wanted to make sure it fit right and looked right for what I wanted. I'd initially thought of this as sort of a turret that I'd have some kind of tank turret or anti-air turret or something sticking out of it. Instead, what I ended up doing was going with a more parapet style with a central area that could be used for a turret or something else. Now, I really wanted to get the join here as smooth as possible. I wanted it to fit on the base. This cardboard is pretty dense, pretty sturdy, so I wanted to make sure it was seated in there well, and I got all this foam cut out. I wanted it to, like I said, nest in there pretty well. Here to the side, you can also see some of the fixings and the little gubbins that I made. Here's the tube cut down. Again, off to the side, you can see some of those ladders and I-beams I made, and I'll show you in the next video how I make those. But I had this piece of a modem that I had cut apart. I thought it made a really interesting looking vault door or entryway. Initially, I was thinking kind of a garage style door, but later on I changed my mind and went for something sturdier. And I just am trying to visualize here where everything's going to go, how it's going to fit on the base, how it's going to connect, where I need to cut pieces of foam out, that sort of thing, and just trying to line everything up. So here I am fixing the back part of that door. So I went and used this chipboard. It was nice and sturdy, had a good feel to it, good weight to it, so I thought that would look sufficiently sturdy for a vault door. And I just measured it out, used the lines on the cutting mat there, and a handy straight edge from a popsicle stick, which turned out wasn't entirely straight, but that's all right. It was close enough for what I was doing. And I just scribed these out, taking my time, doing 3 or 4 passes with the scalpel there to try and get as clean of edges as I could for this. And again, the size of this project was interesting working on because it used up a lot of my workspace, just having it there, having it sitting there. So I had to kind of work around it. Normally, the stuff I work on is much smaller. Even vehicles don't get this big. Typically, I mean, Warlord Titans and that sort of thing, sure. But I think the scope of it and scale of it's really going to be cool playing games around, so that works. You can see me fitting that door in. I had to make some additional adjustments, just some little grooves to make sure that it slid in, slotted in properly. And then slice those out, check the fit, did a little bit more tweaking, and these came out really well. This plugged in to that door, that slot rather, really well to look like a door. And then once I got that in place, I started thinking about how I was going to make it look like a door. Again, initially I thought about sort of a garage door style corrugated cardboard or corrugated paper, but I really wanted this to look like a vault door or something sturdy. But I really like how solid this looked from, it was just a modem. So here I am kind of fitting out and again, trying to visualize where things are going to go. I had this little ladder that I'd built, and I had a taller one, so I wasn't sure which one I wanted where. I did want to be sure that this thing was solid up against the rock face, so I needed sides to go on it. And while I was doing this, I was, measuring twice, cutting once, and realizing I'd probably have to cut and fiddle a bit more each time to get everything exactly how I wanted. This whole process was, I had a design, I had an initial idea, but in progress and stuff, I changed my mind a few times. It was a big project. I have to admit there was a lot of fatigue on me, and as far as taking this on, the amount of work that I had to do on it. I don't know how some other crafters do it with the giant tables and stuff, because this in and of itself was several days of work. I think 90 minutes of recorded time, most of that at 4 and 8 times speed. Adds up to a lot of actual time, but staying motivated was pretty good when I was problem solving like this, where I was trying to make sure everything lined up and figure out how I was going to address things and how I was going to do things. I guess that's my question to those watching is, what do you do when you have project fatigue? How do you get through it? Do you just muscle through it? Do you try to find other parts of that project that interest you? Or do you do what I often do with my Warhammer 40k armies and other projects, where I just heel turn and switch over to something else? Is it procrastination really, or is it project fatigue? I'm not really sure, but I have a lot of hobbies and I'd love to know what you all do to try and stay on tack and focus. After I got these sides cut off, I had measured them so that they'd fit on the side, checked them against the wall, and I realized, oh yeah, the wall slopes outward slightly. So I needed to adjust them based off the slope of the cliff face. I probably could have scienced this and figured out angles and everything else, but I just fell back on getting a pencil and drawing where I needed to cut off, because when all else fails, yeah, you can always cut stuff off. It's a lot harder to add things. And now that I'd mapped where I was going to cut them, I needed to make sure that this vault door lined up with where I was cutting them for. I drew on the rock face because I was going to paint it anyway, and with a pencil there, and then made sure everything lined up so that I could cut both side pieces, glue them on, and have my vault door. Here I am again showing my masterful awareness of where the camera is, cutting into the off screen. Part of that is the setup I have. I've got a new camera mount on the way. Also, the height of this makes most of the overhead camera mounts not work so well. So the door went on. I got out the glue, glued it in place, glued the sides on. At this point, I do want to thank my high school drafting teacher, Bill Troyer, because I'm still using skills he taught me over 20 years later. Here I am using, again, falling back on my high school drafting stuff. I drew out a grid, cut this piece of cardstock out, and then used that grid to develop my vault door. I wanted sort of a teethed, interlocking looking sections, so I'd drawn out the pattern I wanted, and I just followed that all the way down. It worked pretty well. I probably could have done smaller serrations to get more of a interconnected, interlocking look, but I actually like the bigger teeth that it has. It looks more heavy and ominous and more like something you'd see in Fallout or Warhammer 40k as far as the big, chunky, heavy look. So that's what I went with. Like I said, I was pretty happy overall with how it turned out. There was, here's me going on the back and just trying to make sure I have really sharp cuts, because I cut through, but there's those little hanging bits of material, those hanging chads, so to speak, of material that you gotta make sure you remove. And I wanted this to look like metal, so I wanted as clean of cuts as possible. I didn't want any little dangling bits that wouldn't look right. And yeah, here's me just cleaning it up, making sure everything looks tight. I had done, I believe, an even number of lines when I laid this out, so I ended up with two halves that are I ended up with two pieces that was like 1/3, 2/3. So I had to go back and cut a line off of this other one to make them match up so that they were proper. You can see this one's a bit bigger. Check the fit on it. Really liked the look of it, even though it was kind of an asymmetric tooth look. But I got that other line of it cut off, and that scalpel was really giving me trouble that day. I have a brand new blade for it, and I have a brand new X-Acto knife, and I'm using my dullest one possible. So reminder to use your proper tools for the job and take good care of your tools. Don't just keep using the old ones because you're familiar with them. Anyway, so I got these matched up, made sure the door was right, and then I started putting it together. I at this point was pretty pleased with the look. Was actually surprised with how good it looked. So yeah, I got out the super glue and glued it in. I have to admit I was doing a little bit of procrastinating at this point because the rest of the build was scaring me a bit, especially the ladders and platforms and everything. So I got the door kind of lined up, made sure it looked right, fiddled around with it a bit. Then I decided it needed some braces to look properly imposing. I was at this point visualizing it being this rusty relic of an ancient era, maybe filled with, ancient weapons, or maybe just with rations. Nobody knows. So I wanted this thing to look like people have tried and failed to get into it at times in the distant past. So here's my second oopsie of the day. I realized that I'd glued that first door on a little bit crooked. Tried to peel it off, realized I'd end up ripping the chipboard if I tried, so I said, it'll be fine. I'm sure it'll look straight enough. Put the second door on, glued it on, and realized it was kind of crooked. Tried to straighten it out a little bit. Nothing was coming off, so I realized I was kind of stuck with it. It came out looking pretty good in the end after it was painted, but it's still going to be one of those nagging things that bothered me. The super glue I was using, I was having issues getting the chipboard to stick to the plastic a little bit. I probably should have let it all just dry, but I was getting impatient. It was kind of late at this point. I was trying to just get as much done as I could. Here you can see me trying to pry at the chipboard, trying to peel it up, realizing I can't, and just continuing on. I measured these braces out, basically just by eye, checking the fit afterwards, slicing them to fit, and then going from there. I had a lot of offcuts of the chipboard that I was using for this, and basically each time I needed some, I had plenty of scraps around to pull and use. The nice thing with the chipboard is it takes the super glue real quick and hardens up real quick, but the not nice thing is if you mess up the layout or something like that, you're kind of stuck with what you get without having to cut something new. So you can see me kind of trying to adjust those reinforcing beams on there. They came out pretty good overall. The door looked fairly imposing, sort of armored hatch thing. So I was happy overall with it. The top of the door, you can see those little empty holes. I thought those might work well for like ventilation or something like that. As I said before, this was a pretty big project, and it actually took me pretty late into the night working on this door. It's funny because the door took an inordinate amount of time compared to a lot of the other parts of the project. Once I had the platforms figured out, once I had the ladders figured out, I actually did those in a fairly quick fashion. I think a lot of this was me not really procrastinating, but thinking about the rest of the project, trying to make sure I knew what I was going to do and make sure that everything lined up right and that I was able to do what I wanted to do with it. I think one thing I would have changed overall was probably once I had this vault door on, going ahead and doing the base coat as far as Mod Podge and then getting all the colors on the rock. I did that after I had all the platforms on, as you'll see later, and that caused some problems for me. We're coming up close to the 25-minute mark here, so I made the decision to split this video out into 3 videos. Originally I'd planned on doing just 2. There's, as you can see, a lot of aspects of this project that I wanted to show. I'm proud of how this vault door came out, so I wanted to be sure I showed people how I did it, with some of the platforms and ladders and stuff. A lot of the components of that build as well, I wanted to show those in the next video. So as we wrap up, be sure you hit like and subscribe so that you can see notifications on when the next video comes out. Thank you for watching, and as always, any comments, feedback, complaints, questions, etc. are all welcome. Feel free to tell me what I did right and any mistakes I made. Thanks.